Welcome to It's Interesting You Say That.
How do you personally deal with the stress of world events?
Of all the planets that we could go to, that Earth is one of the worst. Like, we are literally in this kind of living hell. And I think about that sometimes, and then I think, but it's also a really beautiful place. And
I want to try to explain my position on things are getting better.
And I have this whole diagram where it shows like the news and politics and the economy and all of this. It's all coming at you. And then you have your personal stuff. It's that the way that our nervous system responds is we go into fight, flight, freeze, faint, fawn. So now you've got all this stress. If your inclination is to freeze, that freeze can last a long time. So the people that are feeling these overwhelming sense of pain and suffering and empathy for others, and just also that general sense of what is going on?
And having that space for, if you want to call it your soul or whatever it is, to be in touch with that just as much, and to have space for that just as much as you have for your ego. So I was really curious on how, I guess, how do you personally deal with the stress of world events?
Ooh. I think they have a huge impact on us. They have a huge impact on me. I think of it like layers. So there's this background white noise, of horror happening. And every once in a while you kind of dip into it and you hear it and you learn it and you go, oh my God, and you dip back out. But you take it back, you take strings of it back into your life. And then when the horrors happen to you in whatever form they might happen in the world that we live in, which thank God right now is not actively going through what people are going through, it colors everything you see and do. At least for me, I feel like it's like a little added weight on top of me, to look at the world. I feel like it does a disservice to people to not have an impact. But I have to say, in all honesty, when I'm on TikTok, for example, and I see someone come up and say, please don't scroll, it's my family, and, watch this so we can have some money for, I try and sit and watch it. And then I can't, like, I don't know what good that does anybody. And then I have to protect myself. So I feel like what we should hopefully do is take that pain and turn it into some kind of action in whatever way we can. So if it feels like your action is to sit and watch every single video you see, then you do that. I feel like my emotional work is to sit and listen to some of the stories that I hear on the news. And I'll tell you one, and then I'll tell you why I was going to start with the joke, because the joke is not really a joke. So somebody told me this joke the other day, and I just keep thinking about it. Guy dies. He goes to the pearly gates of heaven, meets with God. God says, heaven's a great place. You got to come. You got to come in, and we want to let you in, but you got to tell us a joke first. That's the ticket to entry. So the guy says, okay, 6 million people died during the Holocaust and more. And God says, that's not funny. And the guy says, yeah, I guess you had to have been there.
That's a good one.
It was a good joke. And it's not funny, but it's the thing that makes you say, where is God? Why? Why is this suffering happening? What do you do? How do you handle it? Or do you?
Kind of like you, I think I ask myself, what can I do? I ask, what can I do? And which oftentimes, like, it doesn't feel like much, but I think whatever you can do, almost, I think in the perspective of, like, is your house in order? So, like, am I in check? And if I am, well, good enough, I'll say, then, like, make sure my family is all right. And, like, we're, like, if, you're worried about global warming, like, are we recycling?
Right.
Like, and then what am I doing in the community? And then what am I doing beyond that before I can try to tackle issues that might be above my head?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it feels small and it feels like it's not much, but I try to think, what else is there to do but what you feel like you can do?
Yeah.
And if that thing pops up in your head, like, I can do this, then that's what you do. I think another perspective I try to keep in my head is that, I hate to say it, but like, these things have been going on for a while, not just there, but, in Ukraine or in South America or in Africa, or, not too far back in our nation's history, as we're about to celebrate Thanksgiving. And it makes me think things, I know this sounds bad, but things are getting better. But that doesn't negate your individual responsibility to keep making things better and to do what you can.
Well, if you say things are getting better, you mean like that whole arc of history bends, but it bends towards justice kind of thing, that things are getting better. We're not in, the dark ages, for example. If we have a pandemic, not, 90% of the population is not going to die. If we go to war, there's some rules for war. I mean, there's a recognition that racial differences exist. There's stuff like that makes you say, okay, we're moving in the right direction and we're recognizing things that are wrong, at least. But I don't think that that's enough anymore. I feel like, when are we going to get it?
To me, that's the part that hurts the most. I do think things are getting better, but they don't happen right away. I think we can see what's right a lot sooner. And the systems that actually make things right, the people that hold the power to make those sorts of decisions, I guess there's some hope there that with a collective consciousness that this is not right, that those decisions are made sooner rather than later.
But that's not happening. It's actually worse. I mean, when you look at someone like Netanyahu, or you look at somebody, I mean, I'm sorry, but Trump, to me, if you look at, Viktor Orban or Xi or, the North Korean leader, whose name I can't remember now. These are certifiable psychopaths, in my opinion, because they do things without regard for the fact that they're hurting people. Much less, I mean, innocent people. So I heard this story a couple of days ago about a woman who is a Syrian refugee because Assad, leader of Syria, is a freaking worse sociopath. They're all like that. They will kill their own people. They don't care. And so she's a refugee with her family from Syria, moves to Lebanon. Now need the kind of the outskirts of Beirut. Now, of course, the war has come to them, and so they need to move away. But they were in their home, and a bomb came, hit her and her daughter. She woke up in the hospital with her daughter. They have a bunch of surgeries they have to go through. They're a mess. The husband hasn't told her that their two children and their infant baby were killed, because he said, if I tell her that, she will not survive. That's just, that one story should stop Netanyahu and Assad and everybody else. What is wrong with people? What are you fighting for that is worth that woman's pain? I can't think of one good thing. And they can talk about geopolitics and all that stuff. Who fucking cares? They're not making any great moves. So yeah, they'll move, a few miles this way and a few miles that way. And 2 years from now, they'll move back because they'll keep going back and forth like this. It's insanity. You ever heard of the, I don't know what you call her, I guess like a spiritualist or something. Her name is Dolores Cannon. You ever heard of her? So she's this woman she's dead now, but she claimed that she could channel things, but also she put people under hypnosis. She started, this is kind of her job, used to be to put people under hypnosis and, help them quit smoking and things like that. And then she developed this technique because people started going back. She'd take them back to childhood, and then they would go back to their previous lives, right? So she would have these conversations with them and all of that. And she has books and books and books from all these, going back into this hypnosis stuff. I'm not saying I believe it. I'm just telling you what I've heard and why I think of these things. And one of the things that she said is that, we come here to Earth because it is a dual place. There's good and bad and up and down and right and wrong and all of that. And we have to battle it out. And that Earth, of all the planets that we could go to, that Earth is one of the worst. Like, we are literally in this kind of living hell. And I think about that sometimes. And then I think, but it's also a really beautiful place. And I don't know that it's always hell. But there are a lot of elements that are hellish.
I want to go back to, I want to try to explain my position on things are getting better.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to, this is not me trying to speak directly on what's happening, but because I think it's a little bit of apples to oranges, but I think it might be like a decent enough analogy. I think I am the seventh generation from when my ancestors came in on a slave ship from, I think, to South Carolina. We don't know where they came from, but we were able to trace it back to South Carolina. And so I think I'm the seventh generation. I was trying to make a case to my wife the other day that like things are better. And like starting from there, where my ancestors were slaves, and we were trying to reconcile some dispute about like discrimination and race. And we were kind of talking about that whole thing. And I was thinking, like, I don't know, we have it pretty damn good. Like no bringing a whole, however many people they brought over from Africa, from wherever, like, wasn't great. But our ancestors were able to stick it out. They had no choice. They didn't have any other choice but to just live with suffering. Yeah. Fast forward to, my wife and I and our kids playing around, we're watching TV. Like, we have some struggles here and there, but more or less nothing in comparison to what other people are going through or what other people have gone through. This might be a utilitarian point of view. It's a little harsh, but sometimes you find yourself in a position where there's nothing to do but to suffer for your life in order to put the next generation in a better position.
Right.
And there's no pretty way, I think, around that reality. And then it kind of made me, it comes back to the point where like, what are we doing? Like, what are we really doing? Recognizing the suffer, recognizing the sacrifice that is still going on. What are we doing to not necessarily to make sure it doesn't happen anymore? Because I think for some time, unless, we evolve into some AI species, I think that will probably continue to happen as long as this species is around. But I do think we can work towards a version that is better. And I think the fact that we have technology and that we're in a particular situation where we can see what's going on. Like before, like we didn't see it on our phones. We didn't see it on our TV. There was no news on it. It was just happening, and it happened, and it was done and erased from history.
Right.
But now we can see it. And I think this is a special place in history where we can see those things and we can talk about it, and we can get on the phone with somebody and who's going through it and talk to them and be connected to it. And eventually I think that looks like those things don't happen because we are so closely connected that it's not like you can hide it, or people don't have the space. Leaders don't have the space to make those wrong decisions. I think that's probably a ways off, but I think we're on the cusp of that being a reality. Mm-hmm. And right now, I think we just kind of have to stick through it and find ways that we can do things.
Yeah.
Even if it.
No, I'm sorry. I totally see your point in that. I often say that, looking just at my family, like, if I was born 100 years ago, I'd be, in some village somewhere making chapatis in front of a fire. Some people, my father sacrificed, a lot of people sacrificed so that I could turn around and grow up and say, no, I'm not getting an arranged marriage and I'm going to do whatever I want to and all that. And, yes, from an individual perspective, some of us are doing well. But here's where I make the connection. I really think that the African American population in this country is what makes this country great. And I say that because all of the things that we're talking about, like what do you do with suffering? And if you look at the history of what Black people were able to do in this country with their suffering, to turn it into suffering, turning into action, turning into poetry, turning into art and music, and then more action, and then shaping the culture. I mean, if we didn't have the African American culture in this country, we would have what would the culture be? It is such a strong force for change and for betterment and for rights and for growth and for creativity. And so I see that if we're going to talk about, the suffering of the world from a personal perspective, there's a personal perspective, and then there's a bigger global perspective. And I think you're talking the personal perspective, which is totally valid. And I agree that I'm living the same thing. And then I look at the global perspective, and I think I feel such a responsibility as someone who has stuff to be able to make change. And there's where I think a lot of my frustration is in, because I'm a single mom in, California. Like what can I do? And I guess that's what we're trying to do here.
This is what bugs me about this conversation so much. I forget who said it, but it's something along the lines of, the Germans during the Holocaust, like the German civilian population didn't know, or when they did know, they didn't choose to overturn it. So it was like, I think it might have been Jordan Peterson who said this, and, taking it with a grain of salt, I don't know. He said something along the lines of, don't fool yourself into thinking you wouldn't be a Nazi.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, right. Well, we're being tested now, aren't we? Because we have the opportunity to go that way, don't we?
And to be honest with you, I think to some extent he's right. I think the statement is right, but the reality of it to me is confusing. And this is why I asked you, because I don't know what to do.
I'm sorry, I don't either. I think the best that I can do is to be as aware as I can of the underlying things that make somebody turn to Nazism, both for myself and for somebody else. And so the underlying things are, this is how I break it down. And I know this sounds very lefty and everything, but it's either, and there's actually science behind this. There's a conservative view and there's this liberal view, right? And I'm not talking about politically. I'm just talking about the way people think. And the conservative view is about conservation. It's about keeping things the way they are. And people who want to keep things the way they are usually people who are doing pretty well. And so they're like, why are you going to change this? I'm okay. And then and this is why I think, conservatism tends to be for people in power and people who have a good standing in the world, or in this country. And then you have the more liberal view, which is I'm hurting or I feel it when other people feel pain. And so I want to do policies that maybe aren't that great for me. Like if somebody told me and I do this every time I vote, we would like to charge you more in sales tax or your property tax or whatever so that we can build another school. And I'm like, I'm writing the check. I'm okay. Yes. Yes on that. I'm going to spend more of my money so that I can build a school. I'm okay with that. And then so the way that I connect with Nazism, I'm not saying that conservatives are Nazis, please. I don't want anyone to think that. But I'm just saying that there are two ways of looking at things. And one's more personal centric and one's more other centric. And the science that I wanted to talk about was they have actually done studies on people's brains, and people who have the more conservative views. I think you mentioned, maybe you mentioned this a while ago. Somebody did, but the people with more conservative brains tend to have more fear about change, and they don't connect with empathy as much as people who are on the liberal side. And that makes a lot of sense, because if you're going to be empathetic, then you're going to start like opening yourself up to being a victim of something, of crime, or of, I'm not going to have enough money, or you're going to take what I have already, and I want to keep what I have. So the connection to Nazism is a lot of people made decisions that were good for them. Bare bones. And supported their need for revenge, supported their need for retribution, supported their need for, I need to feel better than somebody else. And so that was very easy for someone like Hitler to come in and say, yeah, let's blame the Jews. Yeah, that works for me. I'm not Jewish.
I think I'm very conservative when it comes to, I guess, myself and my family. Maybe close to like the stereotypical family values, but I'm not sure the current political landscape. I'm not sure I exactly have a home, because I want change, but at the same time, I feel like almost paradoxically, the biggest change for me comes from within.
Mm.
And so I want to change. I want to become better, so that I think there's a chain reaction. If the individual becomes better, if the family unit becomes better, or partners become better, kids become better, communities become better, whoever becomes better, I think it emanates. And to me, I view it as that's the only place, and not to sound, I hope this doesn't sound sad in a way, but I feel like, for me at least, I'll say for me, that's the only place I feel I have power and control.
Yeah.
And so starting from the bottom up instead of worrying about the top down reduces my amount of stress, so that I can impact the things that I have control to impact to the maximum effect.
Yeah.
But if I go out and I don't know how this sounds, you'll have to tell me, but if I go out and protest, if I go out and devote my time to a cause, then one, I don't have the maximum amount of personal leverage on those activities.
Right.
There's no check coming in because I have to work.
Right.
And then it's like, now I'm kind of lost. But if I can kind of center myself and say, I'll do this thing, I'll make sure my family's okay. I'll try to talk to as many people as I can. I'll try to do what I can when I can. Then hopefully, if I stick to that consistently enough, I'll be in a position where I can have more impact and have more influence on things that are bigger than me. But if I never, it's almost, and I hate to say it, I never thought I'd become this person, but almost like you have to be in the game, like to play, or like you have to be in the game to do something.
Yeah.
And if you take yourself out of the game, you never get to a position where you can do something. And the reality might be you might not be able to do much right now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's actually, if you study, kind of, I don't know what it is, like protest studies, that's one of the ways of doing things is you infiltrate, you become different, you change, and then you cause change from within. It's change from within and change from without. And I think the world is so messed up that we need both. But you're saying something really smart. And I did a podcast a while back with a woman named Dr. Philippos, and she is a feminist teacher. She teaches about, basically kind of feminist studies. And that's where she started out. And what we talked about was something that, I call the matrix, which is that, you live in these systems and they're invisible, the systems of oppression that are invisible. Like, I think I'm free, but when I go try to get a loan, well, you're a single woman with one income, so you can't get a loan, or whatever. There's or you're black and you can't get a loan, or you're, you want to get a certain job, and well, I saw your name and it's a funny foreign name, so I'm not going to give you a job. So you don't see a lot of the oppression. So it's all these systems are going around you, and the big words for them are things like caste and racism and sexism and patriarchy and all those kinds of things. And so we had this conversation, and I said, what do you do? And she said, you do not fight those systems. You don't get out of the matrix by fighting the matrix. You get out of the matrix by fighting yourself, because what kind of magically happens when you do that is you personally step yourself out of those systems. So you're not participating anymore. You get to the point where you see it all. It's like we talked about it, like putting your glasses on, and suddenly you see all the lines coming down from the dome that's around us or whatever. And you go, you know what? I'm just not even playing. And you're kind of saying that, even though you say, well, you have to play to get in, but in a way, you're not participating. You're learning, you're observing, and then you're waiting till the moment you can strike, but you're not playing the game.
I hope.
Yeah.
Because on the other side of that, I think what I struggle with is I hope that happens. But I also don't want to miss an opportunity that was supposed to be an opportunity you were supposed to take.
Yeah.
And that is, we talked about it maybe on the last episode, but I told you, like, sometimes you just don't know. And you can only really go with what I guess you feel at the end of the day.
Well, and you have to build yourself up. It's not like, okay, Tyler, go and, live outside of the matrix as if you're going to not participate in business and not make money for yourself and your family and not protect yourself in the best ways that you can. You still have to, you still have to do those things. I think that's smart.
And I think this is shedding a lot of light on the issue, but I think my own personal struggle with this, and then also hearing what other people are struggling with, and just the stress of it. And I'm not sure it's particularly the stress of, say, the election or, Ukraine, Israel. I know for some people it definitely is that stress, but I think for some people the stress is just like, what do I do? And it just kind of eats at them. And honestly, I think a lot of people, I think this is the worst case scenario. You have these global stressors that add to your own stress, and you might have some other stuff going on in your life, and you don't know what to do, like external work, internal work. And so you freeze and you don't do anything.
Yeah.
And then that stresses you out.
Yes. It's funny because, I teach a class on burnout. And I have this whole diagram where it shows, like, the news and politics and the economy and all of this. It's all coming at you. And then you have your personal stuff. And then what's really interesting is that the way that our nervous system responds is we go into fight, flight, freeze, faint, fawn. There's those 5 things. So fight, you run away from the problem. Fight, you fight the problem. Flee, you run away. Freeze, like you're talking about, you freeze up, you don't know what to do. Faint, I'm just going to sleep and I don't care. I'm going to do drugs. I'm going to just like zone out of this. And then there's fawn, which is I'm going to people please. I'm going to go around and please everybody so nobody makes me a target, And those nervous system responses don't always happen. So, like, let's say you're hearing the news and then you go and have an argument with your spouse, right? So now you've got all this stress. If your inclination is to freeze, that freeze can last a long time. So it can be like, okay, I froze up and I didn't know what to say to my spouse, and then I freeze up when I have to go to work and talk to my boss, and I freeze up when I'm at the store and I don't know if I'm going to buy this or this. So you can carry that nervous system response. So I always say that the first thing you've got to do is take care of yourself. Because what good are you if you're falling apart? So the people that are feeling these overwhelming sense of pain and suffering and empathy for others, and just also that general sense of what is going on? The world is insane. I mean, it's always been crazy, but this is terrible. And take that time to recognize that you're going through a nervous system response and an emotional response. Get away from it. After the election, for my personal mental health, I stopped watching the news, and I'm a news junkie. And I stopped listening to it in the car, stopped watching it. It's like, I need to protect myself right now and protect my inner sense of what's going on. So whatever you can do to keep yourself safe, recognize that your safety and your comfort while people are suffering is not a contrast for you to feel bad about. It is a circumstance of life that you should be grateful for that you have, and then say, like you said, what can I do? So maybe what you can do is watch that TikTok video for a minute and like and comment and do all the things they want. Or like what I do is, I send a check to somebody, or a credit card. And I do what I can. That's all we can do. Sorry, I have a deviated septum, so I whistle when I talk. So, but yeah, I think that's personally what I do. And then I always come back to this. It's so important to spend time quietly with yourself, meditating, mindfulness, or just listening to music, zoning out, not paying attention to anything but what's going on inside you in a quiet, peaceful, loving, accepting, non-judgmental way. And you can call that meditation, or you can call that just, chilling.
Would you say, I know we kind of talked about the freeze response, and I see that one probably much more often just with the people that I interact with. But would you say, I guess, the fight response, or I guess, yeah, when you mentioned that, I didn't think about that either, like the fight response or the flight response to something like this. But that reaction, the way you said it made me think like none of those are particularly like the optimal reaction to what's happening, because any response that's coming from that fight or flight response, freeze or fawn response, is most likely not going to make you most effective in something that you're actually trying to solve or trying to work towards.
Well, you can, I look at it's energy, right? Energy is energy, and we give the meaning to the energy. And so what really getting to know your body and your nervous system can lead to is the recognition that, for example, my instinct is to fight, and so, but I've learned how to take that feeling that rises up like, oh no, you don't mess with me, and turn it into something that I can use. So if somebody's, coming with a fight response, maybe they're the kind of person that wants to go and march somewhere. I'm going to, make a sign and I'm going to go, the flight response is get away, stand back, don't engage, get yourself calm, get yourself, work on yourself first. Each one of those responses, the one that I find, there are two that I find really problematic. One is the faint response, where people just you can literally pass out. You can become so overwhelmed with your nervous system response that you can pass out. And like I said, for some people, it can just be like, well, I'm going to zone out and just, do drugs or drink or whatever, or I'm just going to go to sleep and, sleep for 48 hours or something. I know people who can do that, which is crazy. But the faint response is a response that happens to a lot of people when they're under so much stress, so much trauma, that they literally shut down so that they can't experience it. It happens a lot with people who are sexually abused, because they don't want to be in their body. So they shut everything down and they float away somewhere. And it can be, all of those are protective. All of those nervous system responses are meant to protect you. It's your brain, without you having to go through all the steps, is saying, okay, I got to do something here. And so if you're having that kind of response where you're just exhausted, you're so out of it, you need to really address that, because there can be some much deeper trauma that is there that's being triggered. And then the fawn response is another one where it's really problematic, because a lot of people use it when they're in abusive relationships. I'm just going to tiptoe around him, or I'm just not going to talk to her. And I'm just going to, if I do, I'm going to just be like, you're the best. I love you so much. Everything you do is great. You know, they have the whole thing that they play out so that the person doesn't go nuts on them. And if you're finding that you're having to do that a lot, that's a very toxic situation. But turn that into energy, or turn it into one of two things. Analyze where it's coming from, and then take care of yourself. And then once you get good at that and you recognize it coming up, then turn that energy into something positive. But that's a lot of work. I mean, that's not like, okay, I'm going to do that, and then tomorrow you're done. That takes a lot of work. And that's physiological work. That's actually working with your body, moving your body in certain ways, doing certain things with your body, learning like Tai Chi, moving your chi, doing, all that stuff. Go to a chiropractor. Sometimes for some people, that's good. Exercise.
What do you think? You kind of touched on it a little bit, but you said the one thing people shouldn't do, or the one thing that will not help much, is the feint and the fawn response, because that signals. It sounds like you were. To me, that sounded like you probably have some stuff going on that is more immediate, that you need to kind of learn to cope with before jumping into anything else, or any other fight, or taking on any other stress.
Yeah. Listen, I'm not a therapist. I've done a lot of training and things like that, but I'm not a therapist. But for me personally, when I see that somebody is in that state where they're so upset, and I've seen this with children, and I've seen this with children who have had trauma in early childhood. And that says to me that there's just such unresolved trauma that's how their body has learned to just shut it down, shut everything down. And to me so I bring that experience into that. So if I see somebody who says, look, every time I listened to the radio and I heard this story about this woman in Syria, and I just went home and I just collapsed and I couldn't do anything, and I slept for, 12 hours and I was really out of it, or I went home and I drank a whole bottle of wine, and then I, smoked a bunch of weed, and then I did this and that, and then that's telling me that it's a trigger. Something else is going on. And that could be the same for the other responses too. Everything can be a trigger. But that one seems really intense. And the fawn one too seems really, that says a lot. You're feeling that need to people please all the time. Do you find that people come to you with a lot of those kinds of nervous system responses that they're not recognizing, that they look at as kind of coping skills? Because a lot of people will look at their responses to stuff and say, well, the way I cope is I just go out and I just go out with my friends and I drink a lot, or I just go home and I go to sleep, or I just go and I, sorry, but it really helps if I'm pissed off about something, I go home and I punch a hole in the wall. That's, the fight response, right? And they may see it as a coping mechanism instead of, well, maybe this is a symptom that something is really triggering in me.
Most of the people I talk to have those have various negative coping mechanisms, but they're also aware
That's good.
At some level that they're not great coping mechanisms. And at the same time, most of the people that I talk to know what better coping mechanisms would be. And where I typically find the most progress being made is when we're able to go past the surface level emotions of, say, like anger or sadness or anxiety, and tangibly pinpoint what thought or what emotion you're holding on to. that is not in alignment with what you need to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And usually when there's more awareness around that and more consciousness around where the coping mechanisms are, not what they are or how they started, but really just like, why do I keep doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Then I feel like progress can actually be made when, and for myself too, like when I'm honest with myself, like what am I really feeling? What do I really think? Even if that feeling or thought is like really ugly, it's like, well, you can't do anything until you look at it.
Yeah. But a lot of people don't have the courage or the tools to dig deeper. Were you there when Lauren, the therapist, came in and did some training with us?
I think I was.
Yeah, and she talked about anger, and that kind of in the therapy world, they talk about anger as being a secondary emotion. So anger is at the top here, and then underneath it is usually, of course, I always come back to fear with me. Fear, fear of not being loved, fear of like not being respected, fear of, and that's why it's, it feels like a really powerful emotion, but it's so powerful because the underlying feelings are so tender. And so you have to like come up with something big to protect it. And which says a lot about me because, that's my go-to thing is to immediately lash out. And I find that really, interesting. And it's a good kind of place to start. So when you have that emotion, just to ask yourself, what am I really feeling underneath this? And then that's going to give you a lot of information about perhaps what triggers it. And it could be a little thing like somebody talks at you a certain way and it triggers a way, your dad talked to you before he spanked you or something, or whatever, or worse things. And so it comes back to what we talked about last week, which is a lot, or the week before, which is a lot about self-awareness. How do you become self-aware? How do you become self-aware? I'm going to ask you that because I think it's different for everybody.
I guess for me personally, it kind of goes back to that conversation we were having about hitting rock bottom, where you cannot do anything but look the truth just in the eye, and realize that, like that is who you are, and you have the opportunity to change, and just not being able to hide from uncomfortable truths. But it took so long for me to get there because it was really easy to hide it or to lash out or to withdraw and to do any other number of things to distract myself from that. But when that road hit a dead end, it came to a complete dead end. And I think you can blame it on maybe not for me, but just in general, you're busy or you have stuff to do, or like what the truth is simply just hurts. And there's other stuff to do. There's a job to go to. There's a family. There's a boyfriend. There's a girlfriend. There's school. And I think some people you can find comfort. You can find almost like a functioning alcoholic. Like you can still drink and you can still work. And since I can still do these things, it's not an issue. But that doesn't mean life could get better. That doesn't mean you couldn't get better. And I think some people just find they settle where they're at. And I don't think there's anything like wrong with that. But I think if that is something you do want, like you said, trying to carve out that space to reflect and to meditate and maybe surround yourself with people that will tell you what they see. And then also maybe having the humility to accept it and not try to fight it, and just sit with it and then try to make a game plan from there.
Yeah, you have to lower your sense of I don't know, that self-protective thing. Like I got it all figured out, and you've got to that's that thing of hitting rock bottom. You ever seen that movie An Officer and a Gentleman?
Mm-mm.
You're such like a different generation. Like all my references, you have like Yeah. So this is a movie. It's a good movie. It's this guy who joins the Marines and he goes to the boot camp and it's really hard and everything. And his background is kind of he has nowhere to go. So there's a scene where he's the commanding officer just really has like an eye for him. Like, I'm gonna teach you something, and he's really tough and everything. And there's a scene where the Richard Gere is the officer, and he's having to do push-ups and stuff, and it starts to rain, and the commanding officer is just yelling at him like, gotta get out there and do that, and 5 more, 10 more. And then finally the commanding officer says, "What's wrong with you? Just leave." And the Richard Gere guy, he's all soaking wet and he's like trying to do a bunch of, crunches or something. And he's like, he starts crying and he says, "I have nowhere else to go." And I always think of that, like, that's how you got to be inside when you're ready to make that decision that, okay, I'm going to go there. I'm going to go rummage through all that stuff that's in there that's scary to look at. But once I get through it, then I'm going to, and that's that resilience thing. That's what resilience is supposed to mean, is that you go in. And not that you rummage through it and then just go, okay, I figured it all out, but you do it with all of those building blocks we talk about, that love and connection, and you give yourself all those things that you should have had, which is being safe and relationships and coping skills, all the things that we talk about. And then you're ready to bounce back, but you don't do it like, okay, I have nowhere else to go, so I'm just going to get really tough. And, you got to face your demons.
I think that is maybe the missing piece to what I was trying to say. Because I think that is the process. But for people who have experienced, the worst of the worst, kind of having that honesty and vulnerability, even with yourself, or kind of dissolving that ego that has protected you from the world. It's like, it's literally like the one thing that you have to protect yourself.
Right.
And trying to look past it. It's a hard thing to try to do.
Yeah, that's a big thing to let go of, is your ego. Ooh, that's really, really hard. And as soon as you let it go, it comes right back. So you're just constantly like, get out of here. And I don't know that people understand what the ego is. We talk about the ego all the time. So how would you define that ego that gets in the way?
I think I would define it as your interface to the world. Mm-hmm. Kind of like you go on like whatever software, any software that you might use, like you have the user interface, so you can actually use it and function. But if you were just left with the code, it's like, most people's like, what do I do?
Yeah.
And I think you need an ego. I think it's necessary, but to know when it's getting in your way, and having that space for, if you want to call it your soul or whatever it is, to be in touch with that just as much, and to have space for that just as much as you have for your ego. I think when they work in harmony, great things can happen.
Yeah.
But I think when either one takes kind of 100% of the show, it doesn't work. Because if your soul leads things, you're probably going to be broke and in the street, because your heart and your soul will lead you to what is right.
Yeah.
I will say. And what is right will not always lead you to what you need in reality.
Yeah. And it might lead you through, like, you're going to be humiliated, and you won't have a lot of stuff that everybody else has. And you'll go through this path of pain and suffering in order to get to a goal where the ego is trying to stop you from that, just to be comfortable in this moment. So I like that whole like computer analogy, the interface. I think that's exactly the way to look at it. Well, I mean, how can we give people comfort when they are feeling so much passion about the horrors of this world and feeling very helpless about what they can do about it? And the one thing I always keep coming back to also is, I don't have the power. I can't do what isn't my responsibility. I have a role to play, and it may seem small and insignificant, and, sending, $25 here or $50 there or whatever, or talking to people, or, whatever, all the things that I can do. It's not fair for me or for anyone else to take on the things that they can't do. Somebody needs to deal with, a Netanyahu or a Orban or, Kim Jong-un. I remember his name. And it's not me. Best I can do is, vote and give money to help and be aware. And then be kind to the people that are here.
Run a nonprofit organization. Link in description. But
exactly.
But no, but yeah, I think that's exactly, to me at least, that's exactly right. And hopefully maybe this conversation can open us up in a very vulnerable way for people to tell us like what they do or what we should do.
Yeah. We don't have all the answers. I hope that somebody, and even if it's just like, this is what works for me, it's going to work for somebody else too. Yeah. Yeah. And I would love to hear from people about things that they would like us to talk about too. So, comments. And they don't have to like everything we do. And I'm sure, and I'm sure that's the case, and that's okay too.